I'm Beverly Smyrnis, here to bring you the stories of people who fearlessly pursue their passions. My guests have intentionally chosen a life of purpose, fulfillment, and balance. My wish is that you leave each episode feeling capable of realizing your boldest dreams.
Thank you, Cindy Cox of C&L Foods, for sponsoring this segment of the People Pursuing Passions podcast and our new Savvy Restaurants, Hotels, and Resorts publication. Cindy has worked in the beef and poultry industry for over 40 years. When you think of all the top restaurants in Dallas, they're probably on C&L Foods' client list. Cindy's worked at this for so many years, and she works with the best of the best, including Albernaise, who is the cover story feature in our premiere issue of Savvy Restaurants, Hotels, and Resorts magazine. Thank you, Cindy and C&L Foods, for making all that we do possible. Well, welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm very excited about this episode of the People Pursuing Passions podcast. We're going to be doing our first segment of the fine dining experience, and I have as a guest in my studio, Johnny Karras.
Hi, Beverly. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about being here and talking about my experience throughout the city.
Johnny certainly has the experience to know what it takes to be a success or not in the hospitality industry. He's worked alongside some of the most notable names in Texas restaurant history. Tell us some of the people that you work for, Johnny. I know it's an extensive list.
Boy, it's a who's who. And, it's kind of, I went through this career working with all these wonderful people and just like, don't everybody just do it like this? But I worked with Alberto Lombardi, Shannon Wynn, Janet and Phil Cobb, Richard Chamberlain, Kent Rathbun. I opened the first D. Lincoln's Del Frisco's. I worked with Dale Wamstadt at the original Del Frisco's on Lemon and Wycliffe. I worked for Patrick Colombo and opened Fousey's. I've worked with a lot of great companies. I worked with Nordstrom, Lifetime Fitness as a regional director. So I've been in and around food and beverage for my whole career. But being a part of the fabric of this city and what's happened and how it's shaped in the last 40 years is probably one of the most amazing journeys I've ever had.
Johnny, on the first cover of our Savvy Restaurants, Hotels, and Resorts magazine, we have a tribute to Al Bernay. We actually wrote the story last summer before he passed away in November. He actually saw the article and read it, and we of course, since revised it a little to call him the late Al Bernays, but we knew that there was a likelihood that this could happen before it published, that his time was limited, we knew. I feel very honored that he was able to see it, and he actually responded and gave it a thumbs up and a heart emoji. So that was a big compliment. I'm thrilled that he sort of blessed our story that we wrote in advance. His nephew, Brad Fuller, who now runs the operations along with Al's kids, talked about, how he just caught this contagious spirit, this magic of the night, I think Al called it. And Brad started working alongside Al, as I understand, when he was like 15 years old, when Al was running the Palm in Dallas at that time. I mentioned this story to you, I know, in our talking and about the magic of the night. And you said, yes, that you know exactly what Brad was talking about. Tell me about what that is and, what you witnessed about that.
With Al Bernay specifically, let me tell you, he is the benchmark for hospitality. I was actually working for Alberto Lombardi at 311 Lombardi down in the West End when he was across the street at the Palm. That's where his legend worked and happened. But this is a guy that really grew in this business. When people say they have the hospitality gene, he had it. It's in his DNA. And you want to know something? His love for this business was endless. And that's the mark he made on this city. Let me tell you, this business is built on food. They love food, but service is why people go back to restaurant. Danny Meyer says it best. People go out to eat, but they come back for hospitality. Al Bernay did it better than anybody in the world. He knew everybody's name, and the way he could just be present and in the moment with you, like you were the only other person in the dining room. It was magic, and his eye contact and his sincerity and everything that he did, he just created such a culture of warmth and love that it's magic. It truly is magical, just what he does every single day. And he built such a brand, and he has such a legacy and such love from this city. And, I remember when I read the first article about him when they opened Al Bernay's, the namesake restaurant, which used to be the Wine Press, That was back in the day. Gene Street owned that with his wife. They converted that into Albernaise, and they did a story about him. And the magic that he did was he knew how to remember everybody's name. And I literally called him up and asked him, I said, Mr. Bernay, I'm in the business and I'm working a lot of great restaurants, but when I was a server, it was easy because I read people's name on their credit cards and had that interaction throughout. When you're running a dining room, how do you do it? And he told me, he says, Johnny, use their name as many times as you possibly can during the engagement with them. Like if I was meeting you, good evening, Beverly. It's so nice to meet you. Boy, Beverly, you look so great tonight. I'm so happy, Beverly, that you're celebrating your birthday with us. And that's how that magic and, it's mythical proportions on how great he was about remembering people's names and how he handled his success with such humbleness and love for all his people. He was a servant leader. He gave himself to his team and he gave himself to the community, but nobody just took anything from him. They loved him right back.
Right. And I think that's so hard to find now. I know that the industry has a big issue, like so many of the other major industries, with labor shortages, with staff turnover. And I know some of the people that still work, including Brad and one of the chefs there, have been since he opened from day one there. I know that's a big part of what he built is that loyalty from the staff. And I know that's part of what you help other restaurants with now. Tell us about your consulting and your staffing, your company, the Monica Bell team that you're with now.
Yes, that's, I am doing restaurant recruiting. I have done consulting in the past where, hey, listen, you go in and indicate opportunities and give them viable solutions, be able to overcome some of their struggles and obstacles in their operations. And that's a very rewarding thing. But I actually found myself doing recruiting about 10 months ago with Monica Bell, who I've known for about 15 years. And she is amazing. She's an amazing friend and she's amazing at what she does. And what I love about it is I am now helping maybe mentor some of these young professionals coming through this industry. I'm not just a transactional recruiter. I want to be able to provide some insight and inspire these young people in this industry on how to really have longevity, how to appreciate what they have. Don't always be thinking about what you don't have and you want more. Be in the moment, be present, embrace yourself with adversity and be okay with that. Be okay with imperfections, because in the world that we live today, if there's any imperfections or adversity, people just go away. But in this business, to create continuity, teamwork, like a football team that has, like the Kansas City Chiefs, that type of offense, these people are synchronized. They're playing all the time. If restaurants continue to keep changing out their players, you have a hard time really building that culture. If Al Bernay couldn't keep Brad and everybody else around him, it would never be that. I mean, because he's not waiting on every single table in there, although his heart is, you know what I mean? But he knew how to keep the right people around him. Great leaders produce great people, period, the end.
And I think we've all had some restaurant experiences. I haven't ever had recently like any kind of real negative experience, but just kind of a head shaking experience where you're just like, you know what, these people don't know what they don't know. And they're trying hard to cover up that, some people that are at the management level at other places. And you can tell there's a lack of training and a lack of labor. Maybe they got to take the best candidate from a group of not so great choices, perhaps. But I've just found that I've had several instances where they really just don't have a clue as far as common sense about how to calm somebody down if they're upset, make it better, so that you got to be able to take a certain amount of criticism, but figure out, hey, sorry, admit that's right. And we appreciate you telling us that. Instead of, I feel like nowadays, maybe it's a generational thing, but if you ever complain about something, then they end up turning it around, making you sound like you're the jerk. And how dare you say something? They become defensive, So how do you train people to have that common sense, that natural DNA that Al and his staff have seemed to come natural to them?
Well, listen, you have to be able to identify talent. And a lot of times when you're interviewing people, you're just going to see it by their posture, their eye contact, their enthusiasm, their clarity in what they say. They're not struggling and they're sincere about that. I always hired attitude and not aptitude. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And finding people and teaching them what that skill is. Service, sequence of service is the mechanics that you do, right? Greet the table, pour the water, pick up from the left, serve from the right, pick up from the left, or, open the bottle of wine, go to women for, like, all those are mechanics. How
Right.
you approach, how you're in the moment, how you have eye contact with these people and being genuine about them being here and thankful and appreciative. And, hey, listen, the guest is always right. It's not the customer, because when you come in a restaurant, you're a guest, like they're in your home. They're always right. You don't have to be right. And when you get defensive because you want to know something, somebody is giving you some criticism or feedback. The way you look at it and take it is how it's going to be perceived. And you're right, because sometimes they don't know exactly how to diffuse it, and they don't know how to really engage with folks because it's different. But I'm going to tell you, that kind of falls on leaders, that they have to train and develop these people. This is a skill. Hospitality is a skill. I had a guy, Mike Patoka, worked as a general manager on one of the nightclubs, and he used to run around going, it's showtime, 5 minutes till showtime, and he'd like ring a bell, and he was like, places everybody. You got to get your mind right, your heart right, get
Right.
staged up and ready to roll, because it's a skill. Not everybody has that A personality that, is gregarious and it's easy for them to get in front of people, but you certainly can teach them some skills, some communication skills. It is theatrical. So think about it as, performing on a stage, that if you give people some of those things, they're going to be successful. But just thinking somebody can go out there and not know how to engage or diffuse situations, it only gets worse. And the problem today is, Beverly, and I know you know this, social media, forget about it. Like, it ain't just 5 people that know about it. It could be thousands of people, and could be very detrimental to you, because I'm going to tell you, the worst guest is the ones that just say everything was great, walk out the door, and you never see them again.
Right.
At least if you get some feedback, you have a chance to win them back. But I'll tell you this about hospitality. If they walk out the door and they don't say anything, because at the end of the dinner, you just dropped off the check and say, hey, how was everything this evening? You never came by the table. You never greeted anybody, asked them anything, their names, how are they doing, celebrating anything. When you build those relationships with people, they're going to give you all the information you need to be successful, because they see you care and they're going to care about you.
Yes. I was at a restaurant where I had a really slow service, and we were nice about it. The poor manager you could tell they didn't know how to handle it. And then we're like, can you bring the check? Still after all this lengthy delay, this was a lunch too. And we had a big afternoon of business. But at the end of it, they said, just scan the QR code on your table and it'll bring up your check. They weren't even going to check back for us to say that, and hope we didn't mess up your afternoon or anything. So I thought, boy, that's the icing on the cake, the scan the QR code. And
it's so impersonalized today. And technology has taken some of that out of just the way business operates today. It kind of makes me sad, because I think being more in the moment and not looking at a handheld, or not handing somebody the handheld at the table right in front of the server. And it's like, service was horrible, but now you have 20% on there. You want me to tip you? Like, it's really uncomfortable, but that's just the way it is. But, hey, listen, there's a lot of opportunities, but there's so many great operators in this business that still make it magical when you walk in their front doors.
yes, and we visited about some of the up and comers. And what do you look for? Like, who do you think is going to be the next legend, and why?
There is a young man, his name is Harry Cox. He is a director for Doro Hospitality with Chaz Martin and his group. And, Chaz is certainly somewhat of a legend himself, coming from Nick and Sam's and creating the Charles and Mr. Charles and El Presidente, and he's got Sister. And I think they're opening a new restaurant out there, but they have a young man named Harry Cox that works for them. And I'm going to tell you, this young man, I knew him when he worked over there for Nick Benavides at Town Hearth, and he just hopped right across the street. There's never a time you call that guy on the phone, he doesn't pick up on his own personal phone. That tells you somebody that's in the game. He is so warm and so welcoming. And just the way he walks through the dining room, it is just impressive to watch. You know, he just has it. And he's so poised and so humble. I mean, he is somebody that I look at as one of the best frontman in the city right now.
That's fantastic. It's great to know that there are some of the younger generation that are in the wings to fill these shoes of people like Albernays, you know.
Yes.
It seems like so many of them are getting older and approaching retirement. So I hope we have some legends in the making.
Well, I have zero doubts about that. And today I actually went to a memorial service for a dear friend of mine, Rick Levitt, that I've known for probably 35 years. And, you know, he was in the business, and I'll tell you, it truly was a who's who that was showing up, paying homage to him. And, you know, I saw Janet and Phil, and probably haven't seen them in a while because I worked at Mi Piace for about 5.5 years and talking about the kids. And it's a wonderful social business, and what a community. And it is just, I told my wife, I'm not in the four walls as much as I used to be, but boy, it is great to see some of these great professionals that really are carrying things forward with their brands right now anyway.
Yeah, it is a very close-knit industry. I know that we actually produced a publication for the hospitality industry in North Texas years ago. When we decided to try to relaunch it, it was amazing how many of those players were still in place and like, oh, we're so glad you're back. And they all still know each other and support each other. And it was impressive to me, like how tight knit this industry really is, and you know, how supportive they are of each other. That's got to feel good to be part of that.
No question about it. A blessing for sure.
What are some of the biggest challenges to being successful as a restaurateur nowadays?
First of all, I would say one of the biggest ones is hiring today is really challenging. You know, COVID has really changed the game. So many people from the restaurant industry just got pushed aside and forgotten. This is a craft. It is a skill. It is a labor of love. You got to know your liquor, beer, wines. You got to know your food inside and out. You got to know how to read the table and read your guests and engage with them. And, you know, those traits, because people are not staying as long as they used to in restaurants where they were coached and mentored like they are with Harry Cox, like they were with Al Burnett, and even with Brad. I mean, he does a tremendous job filling that room. I mean, I know he's looking down on him going, Brad, you go. Thank you very much for keeping everything alive for us. That's the biggest issue, is the staffing, and find people that are going to stick with you for a long time and create a brand, you know, something that is super special. It's really hard to find those things today. And listen, let me tell you, margins are completely different than they used to be. Commodities are more money. Labor is more money. You know, everything, rents are more money, you know, so nothing is less expensive. And, you know, hey, listen, it's not like you can still charge a 28% food cost on, you know, a steak because you're going to be charging $95 for it. And that sticker shock can scare the crap out of people, you know, so you have to have some give and takes. I mean, it takes a lot of maneuvering on a P&L sheet and know how to create profit margins for all your different controllables to be successful in this business. Because you can have a great environment, you can have great food, but if you ain't make money at the end of the month, well, then none of that really matters.
Right. There's so many variables too. Like part of a restaurant's success is that you mentioned it's theatrical. We called Al the maestro of the orchestra and the conductor of it all. That was kind of our analogy that we made about that. And there's so many variables, you know, if you've got one thing, but you don't have the right ambiance, you know, there's just so many moving parts because it is, you got to have the right set and the right scene and the right script, I guess.
And, you know, Beverly, I'm going to tell you, I worked for Alberto Lombardi, and he had two things I still remember today. ABC rule. And I'm like, what is that? Always be circulating. And I'm sitting there going, okay, what does that mean? And, you know, he's like, you need to walk through the aisles and look at the tables and watch your team and, you know, just create that because you're the conductor of the orchestra. He literally said this, Johnny, if you're back on your heels, your team's back on their heels. When you're on your toes, your team will follow that pace. And it's the cadence and the tempo and the intent of your movements that are going to create that energy, with the energy, Johnny, with his little Italian accent. But I mean, it truly is a little silly thing that I've passed on to so many young leaders in this business to teach them how to really command a dining room. And that's not being, negative by any means, but commanding is that presence. It's that wherewithal. It is creating that cadence that your team knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing during service.
People in Dallas eat out a lot. And so when they go out for a special occasion, especially, they're looking for that experience. Like you say, the food can be fantastic, but if the service isn't, it doesn't matter how good the food is.
No, it does not. But when you match that up with great food, like so many of these great restaurants that I had the privilege of working with, it's magic. I work with a guy, Jeff Barker, who is a dear friend of mine and mentor, and for so many years gave me my first manager's job. And he'd always say it, you're only as good as your last shift. Pat yourself on the back one night and tomorrow let's do it again, because you can never get complacent. You got to always be looking for improvements and opportunities. I mean, this business is unforgiving. And, today brands can be damaged so much faster because of social media. And there are so many people that really can make it very challenging for you. But there are some people that if you really read their profiles and the content they're giving you, I mean, it's like you have your own little consultants out there that are helping you with imperfections you're not seeing behind your shoulders, So
it's a tough world. I can tell you have extreme passion for the hospitality industry. And it's been a long span in your career life that you've been involved. Outside of work, what are some of your interests?
My wife, who's been by my side for 34 years, I mean, she is my best friend and my rock. We love to work out together. We love to go to sporting events. We go out to eat. That's kind of our hobby. And I don't care if we're having a hamburger or we're having, a fine dining steak dinner. We love all aspects of the business. We have created a lot of personal relationships with people. And, we literally have watched kids grow up and kids become adults and mothers and fathers. And, now they have children of their own, which, is amazing. And the two of us just really enjoy this business, and we've had the opportunity to eat in some amazing restaurants throughout the country. And we are empty nesters. Both our boys are out. My son George is 27 and my son Wes is 36. It's great to have them during the holidays, but we love our little world and we enjoy each other's company. And I will tell you this too. My wife is an amazing chef in the kitchen at home. She is fearless. She is organized. And boy, the way she cooks today is amazing. She truly is. And in fact, tonight, when we're done with this, I got pappardelle bolognese waiting for me on the table.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Yes, she's a great lady. Okay, Johnny, well, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you back on the fine dining experience here on the People Pursuing Passions podcast.
Well, I look forward to it. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Beverly. I really appreciate it.
So welcome back to part 2 of the fine dining experience on the People Pursuing Passions podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to my guest, Fred Schlesinger. And I call Fred a Renaissance man because his background is very varied, ranging from show business to fashion to financial planning. And now in his what's supposed to be retirement, he's actually very busy as a tennis coach. Tennis has always been a passion of his as well. But in everything that he does, Fred pursues excellence. And one of the hats that he wears is being a restaurant consultant as well. So Fred, tell the audience about your passion for fine dining and how that came to be.
First of all, Beverly, thank you for having me on your podcast. And I, like you and like Johnny, feel that life is to be lived at its maximum level, or what's the point of life unless you see it as a big orange and try to squeeze as much vitamin C out of it. So you're correct. Everything I do in my life, whether it's my relationship with my kids. The phrase that I use is I shoot for the moon and settle for the stars. I'm always striving for perfection and settling for excellence. That's the way I've always lived my life from a professional standpoint, from a personal standpoint. The dining world, the dining out industry, or what I like to call the hospitality industry, I am fascinated with. I've been eating out at fine restaurants, middle of the road restaurants, not so much fast food restaurants, for over 50 years. And in the last few years, I started to do reviews, critiques of some of the restaurants in the DFW Metroplex. And as a result, I've had a few owners and GMs reach out to me asking me for more feedback. And a few of them have actually hired me to consult with them on the art and science of service, on the difference between service and hospitality. And I'm a voracious reader, and I can't get enough information on the topic of sales and service. And one of the salient points that I make to the owners and or GMs is that your servers do not understand that they are in sales, that they are your salespeople. Your food is your product, and they get paid based on how well they treat the client and how well they sell the menu. I find this to be a common thread in most restaurants. Of course, from time to time, my wife and I, when we're out, we stumble upon a restaurant that shares my feelings and my views on service, hospitality, and it's no coincidence or no wonder why those restaurants are thriving. Where I'm going with all this, Beverly, is when we do find a restaurant that shares our view, not only on food, but on the service, we tend to be very loyal patrons because we feel they get it. However, when you look at the DFW restaurant landscape, let's talk about just the upper end. DFW has more restaurants per capita than any city in the United States, and yet most of them deliver mediocre service. And speaking to owners and GMs, they all say the same thing. It's very difficult to find any servers, much less good servers. Years ago, an owner of a restaurant would say, hey, Fred, if you've come across a really good server, please let me know. We'll pay them well, blah, blah, blah. Now it's, hey, if you find somebody breathing, send them our way. And that's the sad truth. You walk into a restaurant these days and they say that there's a half-hour wait, and you look at the restaurant and you see 2 sections are closed. And you say, why is there a half-hour wait? Well, we're short-staffed.
Right.
Or basically they're saying, we can't find anybody to work here, so we're going to just operate with 2 servers rather than shut the restaurant down. And it's just a really sad state of affairs. But again, when you find restaurants like Johnny alluded to in the previous podcast of an Albernays, or you find restaurants like Kenny's, most all of his concepts, specifically the Wood Fire Grill on Beltline and Addison, when you find a Mike McCutcheon's Craftway, who's about to open up his 3rd location in Southlake, you say, there is hope because these guys get it. I also had the pleasure recently of discovering the original Momo's that is owned and run by Wendy and her husband. Didn't have the pleasure of meeting the husband, but Wendy and Barbara and I spent quite a bit of time together. We've been back there twice over the last few weeks, and they just know how to treat clientele from the time you walk in. And that's another point. They hire minimum wage hostesses who are, for the most part, clueless, and they don't realize that they're the face of the business. And how they treat a diner when they walk in, from the time they walk in to the time they leave, is tantamount to having a quality experience. My running joke always, when I go to a restaurant, the first question the hostess asks you, because they train to, is, do you have reservations, right? You've experienced that, I'm sure, when you go out to dinner. And so my response is, reservations? No, we like it here. We come here all the time. We have no reservations. So what? So 1 out of every 10 hostesses will laugh and they get it, but the other 9, it just goes right over their head. I think it's funny, and I use it all the time. So going back to the quality restaurants, the Momos, as I mentioned, the Albernay, certainly. We also enjoy another steakhouse that competes with all the steakhouses in the city by the name of Knife. And the owner is George Sturgios, wonderful Greek gentleman that we become good friends with. He has actually 2 locations, one off of 75 in the old Hilton Hotel, and one up in Willow Bend, or what's left of the mall. But he's on the outside where there's several restaurants. And they were just purchased, by the way, the Willow Bend Mall, by local investors. And they're going to put a ton of money into it and kind of make it into a Legacy West type of feeling with condos, upscale restaurants. And George is there to stay. His restaurant's a little more contemporary than your typical clubby steakhouse. He does some really unique things. The common thread is he understands that we don't have to eat at his restaurant, that there are choices. And that's another important point that I always try to bring home to the owners or GMs, or if they put me in front of their servers as a training session, that no one needs to buy what you're selling. No one needs it. So you have to create a want. You have to create memorable moments through not only the food, but from the very first moment that you greet the client or diner once they're seated by the hostess. And you talk about first impressions. You have, psychologically, you have less than 30 seconds to establish a first impression. People develop these first impressions before you even open up your mouth. These are proven axioms in the psychology world. So it starts from the way you look. This is me talking to servers. It starts from the way you wear your hair, your makeup, the way you dress, your body language. And then, of course, what you say, but much more important to that, how you say it, your style. How quickly can you make the diner feel as though they're dining in your home? And then I drill down deep into the difference, the cavernous difference between service, which is very generic. You can get service anywhere, but you can't get hospitality anywhere. And the hospitality lies in the details, lies in you as a server being professional and knowing how to read the room. Maybe they're not ready to order. Maybe you shouldn't interrupt them having a conversation with the friends that they're with, because that's the reason they're out to dinner, because they hadn't seen each other in 6 months. Things like that. A server needs to be ninja-esque, okay? They need to be there, but really not be felt. Right. They need to be seen, but really not be interrupting or be a presence. Recently, I was reading a very interesting article about one of the top servers in the Metroplex. The owner asked him to talk to the other servers. They have about 30 servers in the restaurant, and why he sells so much more desserts than the other servers, like 1,000% higher revenue in desserts than the other servers combined. And he said, I used to do what every other server did. I used to offer them dessert at the end of the meal. And the response that I'd get is, are you kidding me? Just a cup of coffee. I'm full. I mean, we've eaten so much and we filled up on bread, blah, blah, blah. So he said, I stepped back and I turned it around. And he said, at the beginning of the service, when they're first ordering their appetizers and their entrees, he said, let me just tell you about our desserts. First of all, they're very special. We don't have a lot of them, and we usually sell out within a short period of time of the dinner service. So I'd like you to take a quick look at the desserts, order what you want, and whatever you don't eat, you could take home, but they're very special. And sure enough, they all ordered desserts up front. Even if they're too full, he'll box them up, they'll take them home, or they'll have them there. Here's somebody that saw the problem, said to the owner, desserts are one of our biggest profit centers, along with alcohol. And there's no reason why a dessert or two or three or four shouldn't be on every check.
Right.
And obviously, the bigger the check, theoretically, the more tip. Leads me to my next point. What we're experiencing in the DFW Metroplex is mediocre, or what I call discounted service, and we're expected to pay full suggested retail tips, meaning 20, 25%, 30% tips on a product, which is the service as their product, that is deeply discounted. We're just not getting the parallel of service that equates the fine food that's coming out of the kitchen. And there's a lot of great food being cooked. We have a lot of wonderful creative chefs in the Metroplex. That is what my quest is all about. That's why I've decided to get involved in trying to raise the consciousness of the dining public through podcasts like yours and talking to GMs and restaurant owners. One other restaurant I'd like to talk about for your listeners is a restaurant that has consistently, over the years, and I don't know how many years they've been in business, and they have a few of these nationally, but I'm referring to a restaurant called Ocean Prime, which is in Dallas down by the Crescent.
Yes.
And first of all, it's a magnificent restaurant. They totally renovated it not too long ago. And from the time you walk in to the time you leave, you are treated like a rock star. And it's expensive. It's high end. And my wife and I really only go there during, special occasions, anniversaries, birthdays, whatever. And we've had some private parties there. But I wanted to add that to the list of restaurants that get it.
Yeah.
And that's really what this podcast is all about.
I think what I'm hearing is a reoccurring theme is people go to the restaurant for more than just to eat and get their check and go. They go for the experience. And I know in our story that we wrote about Al Burnett in our first restaurant industry magazine, we likened him to be like a maestro that's conducting an orchestra. And when the door opens at 5:00 or whenever the dinner seating starts, everybody's on. Everybody has a role. And Al was so good at orchestrating it all and being there and calling people by their first name and knowing what they like and anticipating what they wanted next. And I know, that's what you're describing with these people that do get it. I guess it trickles down from the management. So that's the first stop. And then how do they convey it? How do they motivate the people that might not originally get it? How do they train them to have it? Is it trainable or is it a natural talent?
I've always believed that you could train skill.
Mm-hmm.
You can't train talent.
Okay.
There's a huge difference between a talented person and a skillful person.
True.
Skills could be taught. We could teach skills to monkeys, and we do. We could teach skills to robots, and we do. But there is that fine line between somebody that is talented and somebody that's skillful. And fortunately or unfortunately, talent is innate. You're born with it. And I always talk about the difference between talent and skill. I could teach you how to tell a joke, but I can't teach you how to be funny. So the skill is joke telling, and the talent is being funny.
Yeah.
You see that in every walk of life. Most people don't have a great personality. Most people are pretty mediocre. And that's why they call most people the norm. But when you find somebody or you meet somebody with an above average personality, with a flair for the fabulous, being able to take the menu and sell it using adjectives and talking about how happy his other clients are and pleased when they order the steak or that type of seafood or the appet or whatever, and really bringing the menu to life. You talk about Al Bernays being a maestro. I agree with you, but I also look at an Al Bernays or a Kenny Bowers or Wendy, any of these wonderful restaurateurs as stage managers.
Yeah.
And the restaurant is their show.
Right.
And when that curtain goes up, when they unlock the doors, that show goes on, and you're the actor, you're the server, you're the hostess.
Mhm.
The chef is behind the scenes. He's running the lighting
Mhm.
and the scenery and, all the parallels you could draw between a Broadway show and a fine restaurant. They are playing to their audience. And if you feel that you're not connecting just because they gave you that table, you have 4 tables that you're turning a few times in an evening, you may want to turn around to one of your other fellow servers and say, hey, you know what? Why don't you take table 22? There's just no chemistry there. And maybe you could do a better job and I'll take one of your tables. It's so rare. It rarely happens at all that they have the wherewithal to kind of bow out and say, you know what? Maybe you'd be better off with Billy. Maybe he could take care of you better because I'm just not connecting. And I apologize for that. And I'm not for everybody. Just like every song isn't for everybody. Every comedian isn't for everybody. Everybody's got different tastes.
Right.
But it's a great server who's a great salesman, who is a dolphin, and who can navigate and be amicable, traverse with the different personalities that he or she is serving. That's a great seller,
Right.
to be able to sell all types of people, all different demographics. That's a talent. And in my life, and I believe in your life, that intangibles is what a great life is all about.
True.
It's the difference between good and great.
Right.
It's the difference between average and above average. It's the difference between normal and abnormal. And when I say abnormal, I'm not saying it in a negative way, because great people don't want to be normal. They want to think out of the box.
Yeah.
They want to be disruptors.
Right. I like
So, and a lot of this, Beverly, has happened post-COVID. I mean, the rules were completely different before COVID.
Mhm.
But then when everybody was stuck at home, the Uber Eats and all of these delivery services were invented and people stopped going to restaurants. Just everything changed, including our lives on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
Look at the landscape of commercial real estate. Dramatically has changed because people have found that they could stay home and do business and they don't have to go to offices anymore. So I would love us to come out of those doldrums post-COVID and return to the greatness that fine restaurants are offering. And here's the other angle of all of this. The economy in DFW is booming and has boomed for the last few years, even during COVID, and will continue to boom. We're probably in one of the most successful economies in the country here. And people have money, whether it's old money or new money, and people are willing to spend their money. And these people don't have the bar of satisfaction. In other words, they're easily satisfied because they don't need greatness. And so when you find people like myself, like yourself, that demand greatness, we're already immediately labeled outliers. I was sitting with the GM of Brentwood, which is a concept developed by the Vanderlei Food Group. They took over the old Houston's location on Beltline in Addison. Houston's had been in business successfully for 35 years. But the landlord, when their lease was up, took their monthly rent from, I think it was $33,000 a month to $90,000.
Oh, wow.
And the Hillstone Group that owns the Houston's concept said he got the wrong people.
Mhm.
And then Vanderlei was smart enough to move in and try to reinvent the wheel by not recreating Houston's, but they tried to do something new, different. But all the people that came to that Brentwood when it first opened like myself, had been going to Houston's, getting excellent food, consistent service for about 35 years. And now they look on the menu, it's a completely different menu. Vandelay got smart. It took them about a year to figure it out. And now the whole menu is filled with Houston's favorites like spinach dip and the Hawaiian ribeye and the chicken tenders and the artichokes and all the things that made them famous, because they finally said, why fight City Hall? And the GM that opened it, good friend of mine, Dennis Eckert, left because he's going, why are we skiing uphill? Why don't you just give people what they want? And that's, a big part of the problem. The number one rule in selling is find out what people want, give it to them. And rule number two is find out what they don't want and don't give it to them. And it's that ugly simple.
Yes.
And some of these restaurants, they try to reinvent the wheel and they try to, do all this fancy stuff and superfluous entrees that nobody orders. And at the end of the day, people want to go out as a couple, by themselves, with friends, and just have a wonderful evening. And that goes back to your point about, they want a nice ambiance.
Right.
Maybe there's some background music. Maybe there isn't. Two schools of thought in music in a restaurant. They want to sip on a delicious cocktail, and they want to dine on great food, and they want to be treated special.
Right.
And that's the fundamental problem. These servers don't understand how to deliver special service or hospitality. I've gone to restaurants for years as a loyal, frequent diner. Every time I walk into some of these restaurants, I feel like it's my first time there. I feel like they don't know me at all. Other restaurants, as I walk in, they're putting the iced tea on the table. Big smile, big hello, welcome back. How you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. Whatever the case may be. We run into that all the time. Believe me, it's appreciated.
Right.
And we show our appreciation through tipping, through commission.
I think when the restaurant owner really cares about their clientele and really cares about what they do, and they have fun doing it, it's not just work for them. It's not just getting by or, being average. I think when they're above average, it really trickles down. And that's really how you attract a wait staff that stays. Because I know that's difficult in a job market like Texas that we're in now. There's so much competition for jobs that, the waiter jobs are hard to fill.
Yeah, but there are plenty of them out there. And these younger people, frankly, they don't want to work. And if they do work, they're doing you a favor. It's one of the reasons why in the last few years post-COVID that you see so much turnover in restaurants, because they do you a favor and they work. And then when they're pressured to raise their game, they say it's not worth it and they quit.
Right.
And they go on unemployment or go home to their parents where they're living and, let the parents take care of them, which is a phenomenon that's happening in America.
Yes.
It was happening in my house up until a couple of years ago, I could tell you that. Somebody must have kicked my son in the head and he turned things around and now he's a highly contributing member of society. So, so staying on service, the restaurant owners or the GM say, we can't afford to give great service. I said, no, you got it wrong. You can't afford not to.
Yeah.
Because if you don't go out of your way to train people, to select the best possible people, then you're going to be out of business within a year. And the statistics on failed restaurants, it's the highest failure rate of any small business in America.
No matter how great the ambiance is or how great the chef is, if the delivery, the service, and the experience that you have at the restaurant isn't outstanding, you're going to go somewhere else for that special occasion.
Yeah.
You can't gamble on bad service. You got to go where you're going to get good service.
But it is such a tough business. I mean,
Yes.
you're ordering all this food in advance. How much of this do you order? How much of that do you order? And then you're dealing with spoilage. It's a commodity that goes bad in a few days. Particularly if you're in the seafood business or even vegetables, whatever the case may be, desserts, things like that. It's a very, very difficult business. And yet people are constantly believing that they have a better mousetrap, and restaurants are opening up faster than restaurants are closing. In fact, restaurants are closing on a relatively aggressive pace. If you look in D Magazine every year in December or January, come out with a list of failed restaurants. And then they also come out with a list of new restaurants. By the way, there are other examples of great restaurants, and they don't have to necessarily be $500 a plate restaurants. I'm referring to a very small group of restaurants down by Lovers in Inwood called Lovers Seafood. They have a wonderful, cozy ambiance in the restaurant, but the real gem is sitting on their cozy patio that you can eat in 12 months out of the year. They keep it air conditioned and they keep it heated. And the servers there, I don't know what they do to attract great personalities, are wonderful. The food is very good. It's not, top of the line food, but the seafood is always fresh. And they have some live music on a Sunday brunch, and it's special. And we like dining at places that are special and make us feel special, because Beverly, we work extremely hard for every dollar that we earn.
Sure.
And the servers need to have that mentality. People coming into your restaurant, they're pulling up in a late model, 6-figure car.
Right.
Well, they have earned a level of respect because they are successful and they want to be treated like they're successful. They're not earning $40,000 a year. These are wealthy people. I don't want to say rich. These are wealthy people, maybe second, third generation, whatever the case may be. And they've been there, done it. They've dined all over the world, and they hold you and your restaurant to those international standards. I grew up in New York. I grew up on Long Island. I lived in Manhattan. And let me tell you something. If you are not on your game and you are not 5-star every night in your food and service, you will go out of business. There are literally tens of restaurants within a few hundred yards of your restaurant. And you better be good. That's the problem in DFW. These restaurants just come and go. Same thing I'd say in LA, highly, highly competitive. Competitive because all these great restaurants push the bar. In Dallas, they're competitive because there's so many restaurants. There's just a large quantity.
Mm-hmm.
But most of them miss the mark.
And there's a lot of new people trying them for the first time. So
right.
If they're in the right location, they have the traffic, whether their service and their food is any good or not, at least for a while, right?
And we have so many people, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people moving to DFW, moving to Texas per year because people realize what a great state Texas is because we don't have state income tax and the weather is relatively on the warm side. Of course, sometimes a little too warm, but we don't have those long winters like you have in, Chicago and Michigan and New York, the East Coast. People are really friendly and nice and everything's new. If it's not new, they knock it down. They put up a new one. And it's the reason why I moved here back in 1984. With that comes now all these different taste levels and experiences from people that were brought up in different parts of the United States. So if you're a New Yorker and you moved here, or you're from LA or Chicago, you're demanding because that's the environment you grew up in. You grew up in a demanding environment in a older, large city. Take an older, small city like Philly, Baltimore. Those areas are highly demanding. You move here from Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, you let things slide because you don't know what great is. You never had great. There's a reason why New York's a great city. LA's a great city, Chicago, because there's greatness all around, whether it's the food, music, entertainment, sports. It's all great. That's what they're all about. They're all about winning.
Right. You mentioned, and you told me an interesting story about Chick-fil-A and service, actually hiring the Ritz-Carlton consultants to train their people in a fast food restaurant.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. It's so dichotomous.
Yes.
That Chick-fil-A that you think of as fast food, it's actually fine fast food. It's wonderful fast food. It's not crappy fast food that's filled with unnutritious ingredients. one of the people in the upper management of Chick-fil-A said, we want to be the Ritz-Carlton of fast food. So they went to Ritz-Carlton and they spent an enormous amount of money, and they had Ritz-Carlton come in and train upper management on how to serve people. And Chick-fil-A adopted the prestigious attitude of the Ritz-Carlton. So I'll give you an example of the greatness of the Ritz-Carlton. You walk into the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton hotel, any hotel in the world, and you say, excuse me, to the front desk person, where's the ladies' room? 9.5 out of 10 hotels, they would just point, oh, it's down the hall and you make a left. Not at the Ritz-Carlton. They'll get out from behind the desk and they'll walk you, they'll escort you to the door of the ladies' room. And they'll point to it with their hand like that. Their hand is always like that, outstretched. And they'll say, is there anything else I could do for you, ma'am? Is there anything else I could do for you is a will do attitude versus a can do. Anybody can do something, but not everybody will do it.
Right.
So it's not enough that they escorted you to the ladies' room. They go above and beyond. They said, and is there anything else I could do for you to make your stay a Ritz-Carlton experience? And you could substitute the word greatness for Ritz-Carlton. You know, every time I think about it, it is just wonderful. It happened to me. I was in the Ritz-Carlton in Naples, Florida, giving a talk. I was actually hired as a keynote speaker. There was a conference there. And I was in the lobby, and I wanted to go to the men's room. And there was a maintenance worker on a ladder replacing a light bulb on one of the chandeliers in the lobby. And I said, excuse me, sir, can you tell me where the men's room is? And I give you my word, he got down off the ladder rather than going, oh, yeah, it's just down past the reception desk and make a left. Got down off the ladder, walked me to the men's room, and said, is there anything else I could do for you, sir? And that was 30 years ago.
Wow.
Still remember it.
Wow.
And that's, to me, what fine dining should be. It should be memorable. Just like a great movie,
Yes.
a great song, a great book, it deserves being remembered.
Do you know some examples of how Chick-fil-A put to practice what they learned in that process?
Yes, they went out and hired retired senior citizens, men, women, and they pay them very well, by the way. And their sole job is to walk through the dining room with a pitcher of iced tea and a pitcher of ice water. And their sole responsibility is to make sure that the cups of iced tea and the cups of water are consistently refilled with a smile. And they're thrilled to have a place to go. And they want to talk and they want to interact and they're delightful.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I read so many reviews on restaurants. I make it my business too. I read Google reviews. I read Yelp reviews. And lately I've been reading a lot of Open Table reviews. I assume your listeners know what Open Table is. It's an app where you could reserve a table.
Sure.
And they provide, part of their service is reviews. Out of 1,000 reviews, well over 800 of them, well over 80%, when it's not a 5-star review, when it's a 4-star down to 1 star, focuses into service.
Sure.
And I don't know if these GMs and if these restaurant owners are reading these reviews, because if they read them, again, going back to Selling 101, find out what your customer wants, give it to them. Find out what they don't want, don't give it to them. So if you're consistently reading a review of your restaurant where your diners are saying, hey, the food is great, but what do I have to do to get more water? My water was not refilled during the entire hour-and-a-half service. My iced tea glass laid empty after I drank the initial glass of iced tea. That is criminal, heinous, or should be in a restaurant.
Right.
Just basic.
Yes.
You know, so I'll kid around with the server if they have a sense of humor. I've gotten more water when I was in prison than when I'm here. At least in prison, I got water and bread. Where's the bread? The basket's empty, and I have no water. Some of them laugh, but I have to grovel. My wife and I love iced tea, and we drink a lot of it. And during the course of a service, we may easily go through 3-4 glasses of iced tea. And we know a lot of people that love iced tea or love water. It should be constantly filled. Chick-fil-A goes out of their way to make sure that the iced tea and the water is filled. So if you have a company that does that, you can imagine how good the food is.
Sure.
And their service. I mean, they get people in, they get people out. What somebody said to me is all of these restaurants, they boil down to great systems or lack of systems. And when a restaurant is struggling, you look at the system they have or the system that they should have. In other words, that they don't have a system in place for bussing tables or filling water, things like that. So it goes beyond the server. And back to your point, the horse is as healthy as the head.
Right.
If the owner or GM is not presenting a strong culture of excellence, then they can't expect the servers to deliver greatness if they're not taught to be great. That's where there's a cavernous difference between talent and skill. There's no skill to pouring water. There is a talent to see how often that diner drinks and empties the water glass. That's where the talent comes in. Reading the room. Great sellers know how to adjust, know how to read the room based on who they're dealing with. The mediocre ones say, oh, I'm really good with young people, or I'm great with Indian couples. You got to be great with everybody, unless you're serving in an Indian restaurant, a young Indian restaurant.
So I just want to thank you for being excellent at what you do and for sharing your thoughts about what it takes to be excellent in the restaurant industry here today. Really appreciate knowing you. You're very inspiring and seem to be very successful at everything you touch.
Well, thank you. And for me, my close, my wrap up is, unless and until restaurants realize that great service needs to be on par with the great food that they serve, they will continue to struggle. And right now, restaurants are thriving because of the just sheer quantity of people with money. But as soon as the economy tightens up, and it will because it's cyclical, they will feel it immediately versus the great restaurants that have been serving greatness in food and service as a way of life. That's just what it's all about. We love being served, but we love hospitality even more. And my final statement is, greatness lies within the details. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Brad. We really appreciate your time with us today and all your inspiring words.
Thank you.